FM radio and at Gwala Being News.
And whilst you're still doing that, let's go to Mozambique now, where the Minister of Land and Environment, Yvette Maibase, has announced that the country will soon ban the use of plastic bags, a move that was welcomed by Greenpeace Africa. We talk to them now. Angelo Lowe is Greenpeace Africa's plastics project lead. Angelo, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this is a victory for your organization, a victory for the country, but importantly, a victory for the environment. How do you receive the news?
The news is definitely welcomed. The Mozambican government's decision to put in place a plastic ban is not just a victory for the region or for the continent. It's a victory for the rest of the world in our ambitions to curb the use of single-use plastic, because if you're all aware, we're facing an international plastics crisis at the moment.
Yeah, but how, the usage of plastic bags and single-use plastic in Mozambique versus South Africa, where it is still allowed, and a much more developed country than Mozambique, what does it tell you? And how much usage there to even warrant a country banning it?
Well, I mean, the sort of prevalence of plastic in all countries across the African continent is pretty high in terms of usage, and I think that's why we have so many countries who have already responded to it. Mozambique will be the 35th country on the African continent to include some sort of legislation that curbs the use of single-use plastic. And it's just unfortunate that a country like South Africa has not identified plastic, or has not even started to have discussions around putting in place its own plastic bans, when it seems to be the trend on the rest of the African continent.
But there's a whole industry that is dependent on plastic bags and production and distribution and so on and so on. People are going to lose their jobs. How do you balance it, preserving jobs and preserving the environment as well?
Well, that's generally what the plastic industry reaches to in terms of a response to calls for the ban of single-use plastic. Plastic is not a material that is meant to be used once off. Plastic actually spends hundreds of years to actually deteriorate, and plastic is a material that was meant or developed to have longevity. And so we're not necessarily calling for the use of or for the complete erasure of plastics, but that plastics be used in the ways that it was intended, for items that were meant to last longer, instead of the single-use culture that we have begun to adopt. And the reason why we have adopted a single-use culture of plastic is because if you look at where plastic comes from, the fossil fuels that are made, there's less of a demand for fossil fuels. And so you find in the past 10 years that there's been an elevation of plastics in a ridiculous manner that sort of surpasses the amount of plastics that has been created for the past 60 years.
Yeah, so it's not something that is going to happen immediately. It's going to take over 12 months or so. But in the meantime, then what happens? Is there going to be education? Is there going to be perhaps some interventions to the industries that are producing plastic to come up with something that is biodegradable, for instance?
Well, the best solution to any kind of plastic, or the best sort of alternatives to plastic, is definitely developing a different mindset, where we start to have a reuse culture, where we're not in the mindset, the consumer mindset of using something once off and sort of discarding it. And I think that's where we come from as an organization, as Greenpeace Africa. We are hoping to change consumer behavior in a way that we can get major retailers, in a way that we can get governments to enforce or to start garnering a culture where people are using this reuse model, where things are available to you at the shops, where you can bring your container and pick things up. And there are some retailers who are already doing that, so it's not impossible, because people have shifted this model all across the world.
Thank you very much. Angelo Lowe is a Greenpeace Africa's plastics project lead. And maybe the question would be, should South Africa also consider banning plastic use, single-use plastic? It ends up in the ocean, for instance. The fish starts eating it, and the fish comes back into our stomachs because we eat the fish that would have eaten the plastic, and you know what happens after that. Should we consider it, perhaps, or it's okay? It is under control. Your views on 0891